I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. My son Brian cried out in horror as my daughter-in-law Stephanie stood still, her arm extended after throwing the glass of wine at my face. "You worthless old hag! When I ask you for more wine, you obey!" she screamed, stumbling drunk in my dining room. At that moment, something inside me snapped. As a retired judge, I knew the law very well, and I knew exactly how to use it to show her who was really calling the shots in this house. But before I continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. The dinner had started off quietly. It was just another Friday night meal I usually prepared since my son Brian and Stephanie moved into my house 6 months ago. The story was always the same. They were saving up to buy their own place. They just needed some time. 6 months later, they were still here. I prepared a prime rib roast that took hours in the oven. The table was set with my best china, the ones I only used for special occasions, though these Friday dinners had become somewhat of a tradition. The crystal glasses I inherited from my grandmother shimmered under the light of the chandelier. For me, these small formalities mattered. After 30 years as a criminal court judge, routine and order were what kept me anchored in retirement. Stephanie arrived already agitated. She walked in the front door at 7:30 p.m., tossed her designer purse onto the antique sofa without a care, and went straight to the bar in the corner of the living room. I watched silently as she poured herself a heavy amount of red wine, my special Cabernet that I'd been saving, while complaining about work. "That idiot of a boss thinks he can keep pressing me," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "He made me redo the entire quarterly report because, according to him, critical details were missing." She emptied the glass in 3 big gulps and filled another before even sitting down at the table. Brian shot me an apologetic look as he helped carry the plates to the table. My son had always been like that, trying to please everyone, avoiding confrontation at any cost. At 35, his kind eyes and gentle demeanor reminded me so much of his father, my late husband James. But where James had been confident and self-assured, Brian seemed to fold inward, especially around Stephanie. "Mom spent all day on this roast," Brian said softly, trying to steer the conversation toward dinner. "It smells amazing." Stephanie barely acknowledged him as she slumped into her chair, already on her second glass. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, a gift from Brian that I knew he couldn't afford, caught the light as she reached for the wine bottle again. During dinner, I tried to maintain a civilized conversation, asking about Brian's work at the veterinary clinic, commenting on the new book I was reading about the Supreme Court's most influential decisions. Anything to dilute the growing tension Stephanie carried with her. But every time we spoke, Stephanie interrupted with some cynical comment or rolled her eyes like a moody teenager and not a 32-year-old woman. And with every interruption, she drank more wine. "So, Brian, how was that emergency surgery you mentioned yesterday?" I asked, cutting into my roast. "It went well, actually." The retriever had swallowed. "God, do we have to talk about dog surgery during dinner?" Stephanie cut in, swirling her wine. "It's disgusting. I was just talking about the same boring stuff you always talk about," she finished for him, her words slightly slurred. "No one cares about Miss Abernathy's precious Goldie or whatever." I watched my son's face fall. He looked down at his plate, pushing food around with his fork. My heart ached for him. This wasn't the life I had envisioned for my brilliant, compassionate son, who had worked so hard to become a veterinarian. By the 3rd bottle, I decided that enough was enough. When Stephanie held out her empty glass in my direction, as if I were a waitress waiting to serve her, I simply said, "I think you've had enough for today, Stephanie." She froze, the glass still raised in the air, her eyes fixed on me as if she couldn't believe what she had heard. The room suddenly went silent. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to hold its breath. "What?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. "I said you've had enough," I repeated calmly. This is my house, and I will not allow you to get drunk this way at my table." It was like lighting the fuse. Her face turned red, not just from the wine, but from a sudden fury that seemed to have been there, bubbling under the surface for months. "Your house," she laughed, a bitter sound that cut the air. "Just because we have to live in this old museum with you doesn't mean you can treat us like children." Brian touched her arm. "Stephanie, please." Stephanie pulled her hand away forcefully. "No, Brian, I'm tired of this. Your mother looks at us as if we were intruders, as if we weren't worthy to walk on her precious hardwood floors." She turned to me, her eyes narrowed. "Do you know what your problem is? You can't accept that you're no longer the powerful Judge Brenda Cook. Now you're just a lonely, retired old woman who needs to control everything and everyone around her to feel important." I remained calm. Years in the courtroom had taught me not to show a reaction when provoked. I kept my face neutral, though inside I could feel my heart racing. I took a slow sip of water, placed the glass down carefully, and looked directly into her eyes. "If that's how you feel, maybe it's time for you to find somewhere else to live." "Mom!" Brian exclaimed, horrified. Stephanie smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind I'd seen countless times on defendants who thought they had the upper hand. Servants shouldn't talk like that to their superiors. She held out the glass again. "Now more wine." "No," that was all I needed to say. In a movement too fast for me to react, Stephanie threw the glass directly at my face. The crystal, which had been in my family for 3 generations, shattered against my right temple. I felt the sharp pain of the impact, then the warm heat of blood running down the side of my face. My son screamed. Stephanie stood there breathing heavily, almost surprised by her own action, but showing no remorse. I brought my hand to my temple and looked at my fingers, now stained red. The silence in the room was deafening. 30 years sending criminals to prison, and now I was bleeding at my own dining room table. "Andy," I said with a calm that I did not feel, "take your wife to her room now." Brian rushed to pull Stephanie, who still seemed stunned by what she had done. She didn't resist as he guided her away from the table. I heard their steps going up the stairs, the bedroom door slamming shut, followed by muffled arguing. I went to the bathroom and examined the cut in the mirror. It wasn't deep, but it would bleed a lot, as head wounds often do. As I cleaned the wound with cold water, my thoughts organized themselves like a prosecutor preparing a case. I documented everything with my cell phone. I photographed the cut, the blood stain on my white blouse, the shards of glass on the dining room floor. I collected every fragment and put them in a plastic bag. Evidence. 30 years in the justice system taught me that evidence is everything. That night I couldn't sleep. Sitting in my office with an ice pack against my temple, I began to outline my plan. Not for revenge. Revenge is emotional, impulsive. What I needed was justice. I needed to protect my son and my house. At 6 minutes past midnight, with the wound already forming a purplish-blue bruise, I picked up the phone. "Miami Police Department, how can I help you? I want to report a case of assault." The officer arrived at 7:30 a.m. As the morning sun began to filter through the curtain cracks, Brian and Stephanie were still sleeping, exhausted after the explosion of the night before. I had barely slept myself, but years on the bench had taught me to function on minimal rest. I opened the door and the police officer, a middle-aged man with gray hair at his temples, introduced himself. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Officer Marcus Jackson. I received a call about an assault." I invited him in and took him to the dining room where the pieces of glass were still preserved in a corner, marked with small numbered labels that I'd prepared during my sleepless hours. "It was here where it happened," I explained, keeping my voice low so as not to wake the 2 upstairs. "My daughter-in-law threw this glass at my face when I refused to serve her more wine. She had already had too much to drink." I showed him the photos on my cell phone, the cut on my temple, the blood on my blouse, the shards of crystal on the floor. Officer Jackson wrote everything down with a professional, non-judgmental expression. Is the aggressor still in the residence? He asked. Yes, sleeping upstairs with my son. Do you wish to file a formal complaint? I hesitated only for a second, thinking of Brian, but then I remembered Stephanie's look as she threw the glass. That certainty that she could assault me in my own house and get away with it. Yes, officer. He nodded, making more notes on his pad. I'll need to speak with your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Cook. Just as he said this, I heard movement upstairs. Footsteps, a door opening. Brian appeared at the top of the stairs, his face drained of color when he saw the police officer. Mom, what's going on? He asked, descending the stairs slowly. Before I could answer, Stephanie appeared behind him, looking disheveled but remarkably composed considering her state the night before. When she saw Officer Jackson, her demeanor changed instantly. The arrogance of the night before melted away, replaced by a vulnerable, confused expression. What's happening? She asked, her voice small and trembling. Officer Jackson stood. Mrs. Stephanie Cook? I'm Officer Jackson with the Miami PD. I need to ask you some questions regarding an incident that occurred here last night. Stephanie's eyes darted from the officer to me, then to Brian. Her confusion seemed to morph into understanding, then anger, and finally, remarkably, fear. Brian? She said, reaching for my son's hand. Brian looked torn, his eyes moving between his wife and me. I could see the conflict playing across his face, the loyalty to his wife battling with the undeniable evidence of what she had done. Mrs. Cook alleges that you threw a glass at her face, causing injury. Officer Jackson continued, his tone matter-of-fact. That's a misunderstanding, Stephanie stammered, suddenly finding her voice. We had an argument, yes, but I never meant to hurt anyone. The glass slipped. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The cut on my temple, the blood-stained blouse I'd preserved in a plastic bag, the carefully collected shards of glass. Mrs. Cook has filed a formal complaint, and based on the evidence, I'm going to have to take you in for questioning, Officer Jackson said. Brian stepped forward. This can't be happening. Mom, please, can we talk about this? You can speak with your mother later, sir, Officer Jackson interjected. Right now I need Mrs. Stephanie Cook to come with me to the station. The shock on Stephanie's face was real now. This wasn't part of her plan. Whatever power play she thought she was making by attacking me, she clearly hadn't expected consequences. You're arresting me? She asked, voice cracking. I'm bringing you in for questioning. Please turn around and put your hands behind your back. Brian, do something, she cried out. My son stood frozen, torn between his wife and the law. I could see the turmoil in his eyes, the painful realization that the woman he married had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I'll call a lawyer, he said finally. I'll be right behind you, Steph. As Officer Jackson led Stephanie out to the patrol car, Brian turned to me, his face a mask of betrayal and confusion. How could you do this, Mom? He whispered. She's my wife. And I'm your mother, I replied calmly. She assaulted me in my own home, Brian. What would you have me do? He didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he grabbed his keys and followed the police car, leaving me alone in the house that suddenly felt too big, too empty. The next few hours passed in a blur. I received a call from the station confirming that Stephanie had been booked on charges of assault. Brian called shortly after, his voice tight with controlled anger, informing me that he had posted bail and that Stephanie would be released pending a court date. We'll be staying at a hotel tonight, he said, the unspoken accusation hanging in the air. You're welcome to come home, Brian, I told him. This house is still your home. Not anymore, Mom, not after this. The call ended, leaving me with a hollow feeling in my chest. I'd done what was right, what was necessary, but at what cost? That evening, I sat in my living room, the house eerily quiet without Brian and Stephanie's presence. The bruise on my temple had darkened, a physical reminder of the violence that had shattered more than just a crystal glass. My phone rang again. It was Rachel Washington, my old friend from college who now worked as a financial advisor at Miami National Bank. We had a standing monthly lunch date, and I'd missed today's. "Brenda, where were you today?" "I waited at Carmelo's for almost an hour," she said, concern evident in her voice. "I'm sorry, Rachel," I said, suddenly realizing I'd completely forgotten our lunch. "Something happened last night and everything's been a bit chaotic." "What's wrong? You sound upset." I hesitated, then decided to tell her everything. Rachel had known Brian since he was a baby, had watched him grow up, had been there for me after my husband died. If anyone would understand, it would be her. As I recounted the events of the previous night, Rachel's gasps and exclamations punctuated my story. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. "Brenda," she finally said, her voice serious, "there's something you should know." "What is it?" "I probably shouldn't tell you this, it's against bank policy, but under the circumstances, Brian came into the bank about 2 months ago to apply for a loan against the house." "What house?" I asked, confused. "He doesn't own a house." "Your house, Brenda. He had papers that appeared to give him power of attorney over your affairs. He said you were becoming forgetful, that you needed help managing your assets." I felt as if someone had punched me in the stomach. I never signed any power of attorney. I thought it seemed odd, which is why I didn't process it immediately. I told him I needed to review the documents. I was planning to call you about it, but then he never followed up, so I assumed it was resolved. My mind was racing. Power of attorney? Loan against my house? None of this made any sense. "Rachel, I need you to check something for me. Can you look at my accounts? See if there's been any unusual activity." Rachel hesitated. "I'd have to do it first thing Monday morning, and it's stretching the rules a bit." "Please, Rachel, this is important," she sighed. "For you, Brenda, but only because I've known you for 40 years and I trust you. I'll call you Monday." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. Could Brian really have tried to take control of my finances? Or was this Stephanie's doing? Either way, a cold fear was beginning to replace the hollow sadness I'd felt earlier. I needed to understand what was happening, and for that, I needed information. I spent the rest of the weekend going through my papers, my accounts, everything I could access without raising alarms. On the surface, everything seemed in order, but Rachel's revelation had planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't ignore. Monday morning, Rachel called as promised. "Brenda, are you sitting down?" Her voice was grave. "What is it, Rachel?" "There have been withdrawals from your retirement account. Small amounts. Nothing that would trigger automatic alerts, but consistent. About $5,000 every 2 weeks for the past 3 months. I did the quick math in my head. That's $30,000. At least. And there's more. Someone accessed your safety deposit box last month. The access log shows it was Brian using your key. The safety deposit box contained my most valuable possessions, my mother's jewelry, some rare coins my husband had collected, and important documents like my will and property deeds. Rachel, I need to know exactly what's been taken, what's been changed. I can't give you that information over the phone. You need to come into the bank with identification. I'll be there in an hour." I hung up, my hands shaking. The assault was bad enough, but this felt like a betrayal so deep it cut to my very core. My own son trying to take control of my assets? Or was he being manipulated by Stephanie? Either way, I needed to know the truth. And for that, I needed expert help. Rachel was waiting for me at the bank, her normally cheerful face solemn as she escorted me to a private meeting room. At 65, Rachel still maintained the elegant composure that had made her a respected figure in the financial world, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her navy suit impeccable. "I've pulled all the records I could access," she said, placing a folder on the table between us. "It's worse than I thought, Brenda." She opened the folder and began laying out documents, bank statements, withdrawal slips, access logs. Each piece of paper told a part of a disturbing story. The withdrawals began about 4 months ago, small amounts at first, then gradually increasing, always just under the threshold that would trigger automatic notifications. I examined a withdrawal slip with what appeared to be my signature at the bottom. It was close. Very close, but not quite right. Someone had forged my signature and done a remarkably good job of it. "This isn't my signature," I said, pointing to the paper. Rachel nodded. "I suspected as much. The bank should have caught this, but the forgery is excellent. And given that it was Brian making the withdrawals, someone known to be your son, the tellers likely didn't scrutinize it too closely." "And the safety deposit box?" Rachel slid another document toward me, the access log for my box. "Brian accessed it 3 times in the past month. I can't tell you what might be missing without doing an inventory." I stood up. "Let's do that now." Rachel led me to the vault area where she used her credentials to bring me to my safety deposit box. With trembling hands, I inserted my key, the duplicate I kept hidden at home in a hollowed-out book, a hiding place only Brian knew about. The box slid open, revealing its contents. Immediately, I knew something was wrong. The small velvet pouch containing my mother's jewelry was gone. So was the leather case with James's coin collection. The documents appeared to be intact, but when I removed my will, I noticed that the seal had been broken and resealed. "Someone's tampered with my will," I said, showing Rachel the poorly resealed document. She examined it with a frown. "You should have your lawyer review this immediately. If someone has altered your will without your knowledge, that's criminal." I nodded, trying to maintain my composure even as a storm of emotions raged inside me. Anger, betrayal, fear, all mingled together in a toxic brew. "There's one more thing I need to check," I said, pulling out the deed to my house. As I unfolded the document, a separate paper fell out. A loan application in Brian's name, using my house as collateral, with what appeared to be my signature authorizing the transaction. "He tried to take out a loan against my house," I whispered, the reality of the situation finally hitting me full force. Rachel put a hand on my shoulder. "Brenda, you need to contact the authorities. This is fraud, plain and simple." I nodded, gathering the documents and placing them in my purse. "Thank you, Rachel. I don't know what I would have done without you." "What are you going to do now?" she asked as she walked me to the bank's entrance. "First, I'm calling my lawyer. Then I'm finding out just how deep this rabbit hole goes." I spent the rest of the day on the phone. First with my longtime attorney, William Chen, then with a financial fraud investigator he recommended, Kevin Torres. By the end of the day, I had set in motion a full investigation into the withdrawals, the forged signatures, and the attempted loan. The picture that began to emerge was disturbing. Someone, presumably Stephanie, though Brian could not be ruled out, had been systematically siphoning money from my accounts and had attempted to gain access to my larger assets through forged documents. As the sun began to set, I sat in my home office, surrounded by papers and notes, trying to make sense of it all. The house phone rang, breaking my concentration. "Hello? Mom?" It was Brian, his voice strained. "Can we talk?" "Of course," I said, keeping my tone neutral despite the turmoil inside me. "Not over the phone. Can I come over?" I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to confront him with what I'd discovered. But if there was any chance that Brian was being manipulated, that he wasn't fully aware of what was happening, I needed to give him that chance. "Yes, come over. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and quickly gathered the most incriminating documents, placing them in a folder on the coffee table. Then I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. The doorbell rang precisely 18 minutes later. I opened it to find Brian standing there, looking exhausted and conflicted. Alone. "Where's Stephanie?" I asked as I let him in. "At the hotel. She's not doing well, Mom. This whole situation with the arrest, it's been hard on her." I bit back a retort about how being assaulted had been hard on me and simply nodded, gesturing for him to sit down. Brian glanced at the folder on the coffee table but made no comment about it. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood, and sighed deeply. "Mom, I need you to drop the charges against Stephanie." I should have been prepared for this request, but it still hit me like a physical blow. "Why would I do that, Brian? She assaulted me in my own home. She made a mistake. She was drunk, Upset about work. She's never done anything like this before and she's really sorry. Is she? Because she hasn't apologized to me. Brian looked away. She's proud, you know that. It's hard for her to admit when she's wrong. Throwing a glass at someone's face goes beyond being wrong, Brian. It's criminal assault. Please, Mom, for me. If you press charges, it could ruin her career. We're already struggling financially, and if she loses her job... I picked up the folder and opened it, removing the forged withdrawal slips and the loan application. Speaking of finances, do you know anything about these? Brian's eyes widened as he recognized the documents. Where did you get those? From the bank. Rachel called me after she noticed unusual activity on my accounts. Rachel had no right to... To what? Protect me from fraud? Because that's what this is, Brian. Someone has been stealing from me, forging my signature, trying to take out loans against my house. It's not what you think, he said quickly, too quickly. Then explain it to me. Explain why $30,000 has disappeared from my accounts. Explain why someone tried to get power of attorney over me by claiming I was becoming mentally incompetent. Explain why my mother's jewelry and your father's coin collection are missing from my safety deposit box. Brian's face paled. I didn't know about the jewelry or the coins, I swear. But you knew about the rest. He looked down at his hands. Stephanie said it was just a loan, that we pay it back as soon as we got on our feet. A loan requires my consent, Brian. This was theft. We were desperate, Mom. The veterinary practice isn't doing well, and Stephanie's company has been laying people off. She was afraid she'd be next. We needed money for a down payment on a house to get out of your way. Out of my way? I echoed incredulously. I never said you were in my way. This is your home too, Brian. Stephanie feels like you're always judging her, looking down on her. She says we need our own place, away from your influence. So she decided to steal from me? To forge documents claiming I'm incompetent? I took a deep breath, trying to control my anger. Brian, do you hear yourself? You're defending someone who not only assaulted me, but has been systematically stealing from me. It's not like that. Stephanie loves me. She's just protective of our relationship. Protective enough to commit fraud, to assault your mother. Brian had no answer for that. He sat in silence, the weight of the evidence before him seemingly too much to bear. I've already contacted the authorities, I said, my voice softer now. Kevin Torres, a financial fraud investigator, will be looking into the withdrawals and the forged documents. This is serious, Brian. Stephanie could face charges far more severe than simple assault. You can't do this, he whispered, a hint of desperation in his voice. I didn't do this, Brian. Stephanie did, and possibly you if you were knowingly involved. I didn't know about the forgeries, I swear. Stephanie said she had your permission for the withdrawals, that you had agreed to help us with the down payment. I wanted to believe him. God help me, I wanted to believe my son wasn't complicit in stealing from his own mother. But the evidence suggested otherwise. Brian, I love you. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. But I cannot and will not let someone, not even your wife, steal from me, assault me, and try to declare me incompetent. I'm sorry, but the charges stand and the fraud investigation will continue. Brian stood up, his face a mask of conflict and pain. If you do this, Mom, if you send Stephanie to jail, I don't know if I can forgive you. The words hit me like physical blows, but I held my ground. I would rather have you angry with me than see you destroyed by someone who clearly doesn't have your best interests at heart. You don't know her like I do, he said, moving toward the door. She loves me. She's the only one who truly understands me. As he reached for this doorknob, I had one more question. Brian, did you take your father's coin collection and your grandmother's jewelry from the safety deposit box? He froze, hand on the knob. No, he said quietly. I didn't even know they were in there. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam would have. I sat there in the silence, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, wondering if I had just lost my son forever, But deep down, I knew I had done the right thing. Because sometimes, justice requires difficult choices, even when those choices break your heart. The investigation had only just begun, and something told me that what we had discovered so far was merely the tip of the iceberg. Stephanie Cook had been playing a dangerous game, and now it was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. And I, Judge Brenda Cook, retired, was just the person to ensure that justice was served. The morning after Brian's visit, I awoke to the sound of my phone ringing. The digital clock on my nightstand read 7:15 a.m. Only lawyers and bad news call this early, I thought as I reached for the phone. Judge Cook speaking, I answered, falling back on old habits despite being retired for 3 years. Judge, it's Kevin Torres. The financial investigator's voice had an urgency that immediately cleared the fog of sleep from my mind. I've been reviewing the documents you provided, and I think we need to meet. Today, if possible. That bad? I asked, already swinging my legs over the side of the bed. Worse than we initially thought. How soon can you come to my office? Give me an hour. I dressed quickly, opting for a navy pantsuit that had seen me through countless court proceedings, a psychological armor of sorts. As I applied concealer to the yellowing bruise at my temple, I studied my reflection. At 68, I still had the sharp eyes that had intimidated countless guilty defendants. Today, I would need that steely resolve. Kevin Torres's office was in a modern glass building in downtown Miami, a stark contrast to the traditional courthouse where I'd spent most of my career. His firm specialized in financial fraud investigations, often working alongside law enforcement to build cases that would otherwise fall through the cracks of an overloaded system. Torres himself was a former FBI financial crime specialist who'd gone private sector 5 years ago. At 40, he had the analytical mind of someone twice his age, combined with a technological savvy that made him particularly effective at following digital paper trails. Judge Cook, he greeted me, rising from behind a desk cluttered with files and multiple computer monitors. Thank you for coming so quickly. What have you found? I asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Torres gestured to a chair across from his desk. Please sit. What I'm about to show you is disturbing. He turned one of the monitors toward me and pulled up a series of documents, bank statements, property records, and what appeared to be social media profiles. After our conversation yesterday, I ran a background check on your daughter-in-law, Stephanie Cook. Standard procedure in these cases. Torres clicked through several screens. What I found was anything but standard. The first image was a driver's license photo of a woman who looked remarkably like Stephanie, but with darker hair and a different name, Stacy Williams. This is from Nevada, issued 6 years ago, Torres explained. Then we have this one. He clicked to another ID, this time with the name Sarah Miller from Arizona. Issued 4 years ago. She's been using aliases, I said, the implications immediately clear to my legal mind. At least 3 that I've confirmed so far, Torres nodded. Stephanie Montgomery seems to be her birth name, before she married your son. And the financial trail? Torres's expression darkened. Each identity has a pattern. She establishes herself in a new location, forms a relationship with a man of means, not wealthy enough to have extensive security measures around their finances, but comfortable enough to be worth targeting. He pulled up a photograph of a man in his early 40s, standing outside a small but upscale veterinary practice. Marcus Reed, veterinarian in Reno, Nevada. Met Stacy Williams at a charity function. Married her 6 months later. 18 months after that, he filed for bankruptcy after discovering his accounts had been systematically drained and loans had been taken out in his name. My stomach clenched. And he didn't press charges? He was too embarrassed. Classic case of financial abuse combined with emotional manipulation. By the time he realized what was happening, she had convinced him that he was bad with money, that he needed her help managing their finances. She isolated him from friends and family who might have noticed what was happening. The parallels to Brian's situation were unmistakable. Torres seemed to read my thoughts. Your son fits her victim profile perfectly. Professional, good-hearted, perhaps a bit too trusting. And the fact that his mother is a retired judge with significant assets? That would have made him an especially attractive target. What about the others? I asked, my professional demeanor barely masking my growing horror. Torres clicked through more files, showing me 2 more men. One a dental surgeon in Phoenix, the other a software engineer in San Diego. Each story followed the same pattern: whirlwind romance, marriage, financial manipulation, and eventual devastation. None of them pressed charges? I asked, incredulous. Financial abuse leaves deep psychological scars, Judge Cook. The victims often blame themselves, feel ashamed for being fooled. And Stephanie, or whatever name she was using, was always careful to stay just on the right side of legality in most cases. The forgeries were good enough that they could be explained away as misunderstandings or clerical errors. Until now, I said firmly, the assault gives us leverage, and I'm not some embarrassed man who can be manipulated into silence. Torres nodded, a hint of admiration in his eyes. Exactly. This might be the first time she's made a mistake this significant. The question is, how do we proceed? The assault case is straightforward, but proving the financial crimes will be more complex. I want to talk to them, I said suddenly. The other victims. Torres raised an eyebrow. That could be helpful, but are you sure you're prepared for that? I spent 30 years listening to victims, Mr. Torres. I know how to handle difficult conversations. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. I can arrange a call with Marcus Reed. He's been the most willing to discuss his experience, though he still refused to file charges. Do it. And in the meantime, I want a complete audit of all my accounts, my son's accounts if possible, and any other financial connections that might be vulnerable. Torres made a note on a legal pad. Already in progress. I should have preliminary results by tomorrow. There's one more thing you should know, Judge Cook. He pulled up another document on the screen. A search history from a computer. This is from your home network, from a laptop that accesses your Wi-Fi regularly. Searches for how to claim inheritance early. Contesting a will after death. How to prove mental incompetence in elderly parents. My blood ran cold. When were these searches made? Most during daytime hours when your son would be at work, according to the schedule you provided me. Stephanie, then, researching how to get her hands on my estate and possibly planning for my death. I'll need a security system, I said, my mind already calculating risks and countermeasures. And I'm changing the locks today. Torres nodded grimly. I was about to suggest the same thing. I can recommend a company that specializes in security for elder fraud cases. I'm not elderly, I said automatically, bristling slightly at the term. Torres had the good sense to look apologetic. Of course not, Judge. I meant no offense. The company just happens to have experience with similar situations. I sighed, letting go of my momentary pique. Set it up, please, and let me know as soon as you can arrange that call with Marcus Reed. As I left Torres's office, the weight of what I'd learned pressed down on me like a physical burden. Stephanie wasn't just an impulsive, entitled young woman with anger issues. She was a predator, a systematic con artist who had targeted my son and my family with cold calculation. And now that she knew we were onto her, I had to wonder, just how far would she go to protect herself? The answer came sooner than I expected. When I arrived home, my front door was slightly ajar. I stopped at the sidewalk, heart pounding. Someone had broken in while I was out. I retreated to my car and called Torres, who advised me to wait for police before entering. 20 minutes later, I followed 2 officers through my own front door, surveying the damage. The house hadn't been ransacked as I'd feared. Instead, the intrusion was targeted. My home office had been searched, papers moved, my computer clearly accessed. Most disturbing of all, the bedroom where Brian and Stephanie had stayed showed signs of hasty packing, with drawers left open and hangers empty in the closet. Looks like they took what they came for, the female officer noted, taking photographs of the scene. They? I asked. 2 sets of footprints in the flower bed outside the window, she explained. One larger, one smaller. Man and woman, most likely. Brian had helped her break in. My own son, committing burglary against his mother. The betrayal cut deep, but a small part of me held on to hope that he was still being manipulated, that he didn't understand the full extent of Stephanie's deception. After the police left, promising to file a report and follow up, I sat in my living room feeling violated and exhausted. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. "Mrs. Cook, this is Marcus Reed." The voice was hesitant, with a slight Western drawl. "Kevin Torres said you wanted to speak with me." "Dr. Reed, yes. Thank you for calling." I straightened my posture automatically, as if he could see me. "I understand this might be difficult to discuss." A heavy sigh came through the line. "Not a day goes by that I don't think about it. What she did, how blind I was. But Torres says you might be able to stop her from doing it to someone else." "That's my hope," I replied. "My son Brian is married to her now. I believe he's being victimized just as you were." "Brian Cook? The vet from Miami?" There was a new tension in Reed's voice. "Yes, you know him? We met at a veterinary conference in Dallas 2 years ago. That's where Stacy, she called herself then, that's where she first saw him. She pointed him out specifically, asked me questions about him. My blood ran cold. Are you saying she targeted my son deliberately? Before she even met him? I can't be certain, but it would fit her pattern. She was always calculating, always planning her next, I don't know what to call it. Her next conquest, I suppose. Tell me everything, Dr. Reed. From the beginning. For the next hour, I listened as Marcus Reed detailed his nightmare. How he'd fallen for Stacy's charm and intelligence. How she'd gradually isolated him from friends and colleagues. How she'd taken over his finances to help him focus on his practice. And how, by the time he realized what was happening, she had drained his accounts, maxed out his credit cards, and taken loans against his business. The worst part wasn't the money, he said, voice hollow. It was realizing that everything, every kiss, every laugh, every time she told me she loved me, it was all an act. 3 years of my life with someone who saw me as nothing but a bank account to be emptied. Why didn't you press charges? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Shame, he said simply. And fear. She knew things about me, private things. She threatened to ruin my reputation if I came after her. And honestly, I just wanted her gone from my life. The money didn't seem worth prolonging the connection. But you're willing to help now? If it means stopping her, yes. I should have done it years ago. Maybe then your son wouldn't be in this position. I have records, bank statements, emails, everything I kept but was too afraid to use. Would you be willing to testify if it came to that? There was a long pause. Yes, he finally said. Yes, I would. After getting Reed's contact information and promising to stay in touch, I ended the call feeling both vindicated and deeply disturbed. Stephanie's predatory behavior was even more calculated than I had imagined, and the fact that she had targeted Brian specifically, researching him in advance, chilled me to the core. I was about to call Torres with this new information when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Brian standing on the porch alone, shoulders slumped in a posture of defeat I hadn't seen since he was a teenager failing his first driving test. I opened the door cautiously, remembering the break-in just hours before. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking, "I think I've made a terrible mistake." I let Brian in, but kept my distance, unsure if this was genuine remorse or another manipulation. "You broke into my house today," I said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "Stephanie said we just needed to get our things, that you'd change the locks." I hadn't. Not yet. I studied his face, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the nervous way he kept glancing around. "What happened, Brian? What changed between this morning and now?" He sank onto the sofa, running his hands through his hair. "My credit card was declined at lunch. I called the bank. All my accounts are empty. My savings, checking, everything. Even my professional account for the practice. "Stephanie," I said simply. I didn't want to believe it. I came back to the hotel to confront her, but she was gone. All her things packed up and gone. His voice broke. She left this. He handed me a small leather-bound book. I recognized it immediately as the type of journal I bought for myself every year. High-quality leather, acid-free paper. This one was well used, the pages dog-eared and filled with neat, precise handwriting. Her journal, Brian explained unnecessarily. I found it under the mattress when I was looking for... I don't know what I was looking for. Some explanation, I guess. I opened the journal, scanning the entries. What I read made my stomach turn. Stephanie, or rather Sophie Green, as she referred to herself in the earliest entries, had documented her entire con with clinical detachment. Notes on Brian's schedule, his habits, his vulnerabilities. Observations about his relationship with me, identifying it as both a strength to exploit. He trusts his mother's judgment, will do anything to make her proud. And a weakness to eliminate. Mother-son bond too strong, must isolate. Most chilling were the financial calculations, estimates of my net worth, Brian's earning potential, the value of my home, projections of my life expectancy. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Brian whispered as I read. "I had no idea. She seemed so perfect, so understanding. Whenever I had doubts, she always had an explanation that made sense." I closed the journal, my hand trembling slightly. "That's how predators like her operate, Brian. They're expert manipulators." "What do we do now?" he asked, looking utterly lost. "First, we call the police. This journal is evidence not just of her financial crimes against us, but potentially against her previous victims as well." I reached for my phone. "Then we call Torres. He needs to see this immediately." "Who's Torres?" "A financial fraud investigator I hired. He's been looking into Stephanie's background." I hesitated, then decided Brian needed to hear the full truth. "She's done this before, Brian. At least 3 times that we know of. Different names, different cities, but the same pattern." His face paled. "She's a con artist? A professional con artist?" "I'm afraid so, and she targeted you specifically. It wasn't a chance meeting." Brian looked like he might be sick. All of it was a lie? From the very beginning? I wanted to soften the blow, to find some way to make this less painful, but there was no gentle way to tell someone their entire marriage had been a calculated fraud. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm sorry, Brian." He sat in stunned silence as I made the calls, first to the police to report Stephanie's financial crimes and disappearance, then to Torres to update him on the journal discovery. "This is exactly what we needed," Torres said, his voice urgent. "The journal establishes intent premeditation. Combined with the evidence from previous victims, we have a solid case. Has she left town?" "It appears so," I confirmed, glancing at Brian, who sat motionless, staring at nothing. "I'll alert the authorities. With charges this serious, they'll issue a warrant immediately. Do you have a recent photograph?" I looked to Brian, who wordlessly pulled out his phone and found a picture of Stephanie from just a week ago, smiling by the pool in our backyard. The image of domestic happiness now seemed grotesquely false. After finishing the calls, I sat beside my son, close but not touching, giving him space to process. "I loved her," he finally said, voice barely audible. "Or at least I loved who I thought she was." "I know," I replied. What else could I say? No platitude would ease this particular pain. "What happens now?" he asked again, this time with a note of fear in his voice. "Now we try to undo the financial damage, secure what assets remain, and help the authorities find her before she does this to someone else." Brian nodded mechanically. Then, without warning, he broke down, great heaving sobs that seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. I moved closer then, putting my arm around his shoulders as I had when he was a child awakening from nightmares. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, though we both knew it wasn't true, not really. Some betrayals leave scars that never fully heal. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Torres arrived with a computer specialist who went through my systems looking for any additional evidence. The police came to take formal statements and collect the journal. I contacted my bank to begin the process of recovering what funds could be traced. Brian moved back into his old room, a temporary measure while he sorted out the chaos Stephanie had left in her wake. He discovered that not only had she emptied their joint accounts, but she had also taken out loans in his name, run up credit card debt, and even stolen client information from his veterinary practice. She was thorough, Torres commented grimly as we reviewed the damage. But not as careful as she thinks. She's left a trail, and with the journal as evidence, we have a much stronger case than her previous victims. By mid-afternoon, there was a development. Officer Marcus Jackson, who had responded to the original assault call, arrived with news. "We've located her car," he informed us. "Abandoned at Miami International Airport. Security footage confirms she boarded a flight to Los Angeles yesterday evening." "She's running," Torres said. "That's good. It shows consciousness of guilt." Brian, who had been silent through most of the day's proceedings, suddenly spoke up. "No, she's not just running. She's going to her next target." All eyes turned to him. "It's in her journal," he explained, his voice hollow. "She had a backup plan. Someone in LA she'd been grooming online, a widower with a successful real estate business." Officer Jackson immediately got on his radio, relaying this information to the department. "We'll alert the LA authorities," he assured us. "If she's using credit cards or her phone, we'll track her." As the day wore on, I watched my son grappling with the magnitude of Stephanie's betrayal. It wasn't just the financial ruin or the public humiliation. It was the fundamental violation of trust, the realization that the person he had loved most in the world had never existed at all. That evening, as we sat in the kitchen picking at takeout neither of us had the appetite for, Brian's phone rang. He stared at the screen, his face draining of color. "It's her," he whispered. Torres, who had stayed to help us secure the house with a new alarm system, immediately moved to Brian's side. "Put it on speaker," he instructed. "Try to keep her talking." Brian answered, his hand shaking. "Stephanie?" "Brian, baby, I need your help." Her voice was breathless, panicked, a perfect performance of a woman in distress. "Someone's stolen my identity. They're saying terrible things about me, saying I stole money. You know I would never do that." Brian's eyes met mine, a silent question. I nodded encouragingly. "Where are you?" he asked, keeping his voice even. "I had to leave town for a few days, just until we sort this out. Your mother has always had it in for me, you know that. She's trying to separate us, to control you." By reporting an assault that left her bleeding? Brian's voice had an edge now, anger beginning to break through the hurt. "That was an accident. The glass slipped, you saw it yourself. Brian, please. You know me. You know I love you." Torres held up a note. "Keep her talking. Police tracing call. If you love me, why did I find your journal? Why did you empty our accounts?" A pause. Then Stephanie's voice changed, the panicked facade dropping away. "So you know. What does it matter? You were never going to amount to anything anyway. A small-town vet with mommy issues? Please, you were just a stepping stone." "To what?" Brian asked, his voice surprisingly steady now. "To what I deserve. Wealth, status, power. Things you could never give me, not with your pathetic practice and your bleeding heart for every stray that walks through the door." Her tone was vicious now, the mask fully dropped. "Your mother was the real target anyway. All that money sitting there, wasted on a self-righteous old judge. Do you know what I could do with that kind of wealth?" "You'll never find out," Brian said quietly. "It's over, Stephanie. The police know everything, about Marcus Reed, about the others before me, about the fraud and the theft. They're tracking you right now." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, the venom in her voice had been replaced by something colder, more calculated. "You think you've won? This isn't over, Brian. I know things about you, about your precious mother, things that would destroy both of you if they came out. We're not afraid of you anymore. Brian replied, and I felt a surge of pride at the strength in his voice. You should be. The threat hung in the air for a moment before she continued. Tell your mother to watch her back. Old ladies have accidents all the time. Falls, break-ins. It would be such a tragedy. Before Brian could respond, the line went dead. Torres immediately contacted the police, but the call had been too short to trace effectively. Stephanie was using a burner phone, disposable and untraceable. She threatened you, Brian said, looking at me with new fear in his eyes. We need to take that seriously. We will, I assured him, though I refused to let Stephanie's threats dictate my life. But threats are often just that, attempts to regain control through fear. She's running scared now, and that makes her dangerous, but also vulnerable. Torres nodded agreement. Judge Cook is right. Stephanie's greatest advantage was always secrecy and manipulation. Now that her methods are exposed, she's lost much of her power. But as we secured the house that night, setting the new alarm system and checking all the windows and doors, I couldn't shake the chill that had settled over me. Stephanie had shown herself willing to commit violence once. The thought that she might escalate further was not one I could easily dismiss. 2 days passed with no further contact from Stephanie. The police had alerted authorities in Los Angeles, but there had been no confirmed sightings. It was as if she had vanished. Brian and I fell into an uneasy routine, both of us working to repair the damage she had left behind. He spent his days at his veterinary practice, reassuring clients whose information had been compromised and implementing new security measures. I worked with Torres and the bank to trace and freeze what assets we could still recover. On the 3rd day, as I was returning from a meeting with my attorney, I found a police car parked outside my house. Officer Jackson was waiting on the porch, his expression grave. Judge Cook, he greeted me as I approached. There's been a development. You found her? I asked, unlocking the front door and gesturing for him to follow me inside. Not exactly. She's been spotted at your son's workplace. My heart dropped. Brian, is he? He's fine, Jackson quickly assured me. She didn't make contact. A receptionist recognized her from the photos we circulated. She was watching the building from across the street. She's still in Miami, I murmured, the implication sinking in. She hasn't run after all. It appears not. We've increased patrols in the area and stationed an officer at the veterinary clinic. I wanted to inform you personally and check if there have been any suspicious activities here. I shook my head. Nothing I've noticed. The new security system has been quiet. Nevertheless, we'd recommend caution. Don't answer the door without checking who it is. Vary your routines. Be aware of your surroundings when coming and going. I almost smiled at that. Officer Jackson, I spent 3 decades sentencing criminals, some of whom made far more explicit threats than Stephanie has. I'm well versed in personal security. He nodded, looking somewhat abashed. Of course, Judge. Still, this woman has shown herself to be unusually persistent and methodical. We're taking the threat seriously. After Officer Jackson left, I called Brian immediately. He answered on the first ring, voice tense. I just heard, I said without preamble. Are you okay? I'm fine, Mom. The police are here, watching the place. But it's unsettling knowing she's out there, watching. Come home early today, I urged him. We'll have dinner. Talk about next steps. I will. Just need to finish up with a patient, then I'll head out. After hanging up, I busied myself preparing dinner. Comfort food, the kind I used to make when Brian was growing up. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds. The familiar rhythms of cooking helped calm my nerves. The sun was just beginning to set when the security system chimed, indicating the front door had opened. I glanced at the clock earlier than I'd expected Brian. In the kitchen, I called out, removing the meatloaf from the oven. Footsteps approached, too light to be my son's. I turned, already knowing who I would see. Stephanie stood in the kitchen doorway, a small revolver pointed directly at me. Hello, Judge Cook, she said, her voice eerily calm. I think it's time you and I had a proper conversation about my husband's inheritance. Time seemed to slow as I faced my daughter-in-law across the kitchen, the smell of home cooking a surreal backdrop to the gleam of the gun in her hand. In my years on the bench, I'd faced down hardened criminals, met the eyes of killers without flinching. That experience served me well now. "Stephanie," I said, keeping my voice even, "this isn't going to end the way you think it will." She laughed, a brittle sound devoid of humor. "Always so confident, aren't you? The Honorable Judge Cook, so certain of everything. So certain that your precious son could never love someone like me without being manipulated." "Brian knows the truth now," I replied. "He's seen your journal, talked to your previous victims. The game is over." Something flickered in her eyes, anger perhaps, or fear, but she maintained her composure. "It's not a game to me. It never was. This is survival." "Is that what you tell yourself?" I asked, carefully setting down the oven mitts, assessing the distance between us, the possible weapons within reach. "That stealing from vulnerable men, destroying their lives, is somehow justified. Men like Brian, like the others, they've had everything handed to them. Supportive families, education, opportunities. What did I have? A mother who brought home a new uncle every month. A father I never knew." Her grip on the gun tightened. "I built myself from nothing. Every identity, every skill, self-taught. I earned what I took." "By lying? By fraud?" I kept my tone conversational, non-judgmental, the same technique I'd used to keep volatile defendants calm in my courtroom. "That's not earning, Stephanie. That's taking. Call it whatever you want. I don't need your approval or your understanding." She gestured with the gun. "What I need is for you to transfer your assets to me. All of them. The house, the investments, everything." "Or what? You'll shoot me?" "How would that help you get access to my money?" "Don't test me," she hissed. "I've thought this through. You're going to call Brian. Tell him you've had a change of heart, that you realized you were wrong about me, that you want to make amends by helping us financially. You'll set up the transfers, and then you'll have a tragic accident. A fall down the stairs, perhaps." As she spoke, I noticed movement beyond the kitchen window, a shadow passing across the yard. Brian. He must have seen Stephanie enter and was trying to assess the situation. I needed to keep her talking, distracted. "Why come back at all?" I asked. "You had a head start, new identities lined up. Why risk everything for one last score?" "Because you ruined everything." For the first time, her composure cracked, raw fury bleeding through. "I had it all planned perfectly. 2 more months, and I would have had power of attorney, access to everything. But you couldn't mind your own business, could you? You had to play the concerned mother, the righteous judge." I recognized the escalating anger, the dangerous edge in her voice. I needed to de-escalate before she did something rash. "It's not too late to walk away from this, Stephanie," I said calmly. "The financial crimes are serious, but adding armed assault, kidnapping, that's a whole different level of charges." "Shut up," she snapped. "Just shut up and get your phone. Call Brian now." I moved slowly towards the counter where my phone lay, deliberately taking my time. As I reached for it, the security system chimed again, the back door this time. Stephanie whirled toward the sound, gun swinging away from me for just an instant. It was all the opening I needed. I grabbed the heavy cast iron skillet from the stove and swung it with all my strength. It connected with Stephanie's arm, sending the gun clattering across the tile floor. She screamed in pain and rage, lunging for me with her good arm. We grappled briefly, her youth and fury against my experience and determination. She clawed at my face, drawing blood, but I maintained my grip, using her momentum against her as I'd learned in self-defense classes years ago. The back door burst open, and Brian rushed in, followed closely by Officer Jackson. Seeing the situation, they moved quickly to separate us, Jackson restraining Stephanie while Brian pulled me to safety. "Are you all right?" Brian asked urgently, examining the scratches on my face. "I'm fine," I assured him, breathing heavily from the exertion. "How did you know?" I got a call from the security company. The alarm triggered silently when she entered the code incorrectly. I was already on my way home, so I called Officer Jackson and came straight here. Across the kitchen, Stephanie was being handcuffed, still struggling and spitting threats. As Jackson read her rights, she fixed her gaze on Brian. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You think you've won? You're nothing without me, nothing." Brian regarded her calmly, a new strength in his stance. "No, Stephanie, it's very much over, and I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in years." As the police led her away, her threats fading into the distance, Brian and I stood in the wreckage of what should have been a simple family dinner. The meatloaf was cooling on the counter, the gun had been secured as evidence, and a profound silence settled over the house. "I almost lost you," Brian said quietly, the reality of the situation finally hitting him. "But you didn't," I replied, squeezing his hand. "And in the process, I think we found something we'd been missing for a while. The truth." Brian nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mom. For everything. For not believing you. For letting her come between us." "You have nothing to apologize for," I told him firmly. "You were a victim, just like Marcus Reed and the others. Predators like Stephanie are experts at manipulation. The important thing is that you found your way back." That night, as the police processed Stephanie and took our statements, Brian and I sat on the porch swing, much as we had when he was a child. The weight of what had happened, what had almost happened, hung between us, but there was also a sense of relief, of a chapter closing. "What happens now?" Brian asked, echoing the question he'd asked days earlier, but this time with more hope than despair in his voice. "Now," I said, "we heal, together." And as the stars emerged in the Miami sky, I knew that despite the scars Stephanie had left on our lives, she had ultimately failed in her most important goal. She had not broken us. If anything, she had forced us to rebuild something stronger than before. The glass she had thrown that fateful night had shattered more than crystal. It had shattered the illusions and secrets that had kept us apart. And from those fragments, we would create something new, a relationship built on honesty, understanding, and the unbreakable bond between mother and son. If you've been moved by this story, make sure to click subscribe and tell me in the comments what part left you speechless. We'll continue with the final part of this journey soon. 2 weeks had passed since Stephanie's arrest. The Miami-Dade County Detention Center held her on multiple charges: assault, attempted extortion, financial fraud, and now attempted kidnapping and assault with a deadly weapon. Her bail had been set at $500,000, a sum that, for once, she couldn't manipulate her way into accessing. Brian and I sat in the office of Rebecca Chen, the prosecuting attorney assigned to Stephanie's case. At 42, Chen had a reputation as one of the most formidable prosecutors in Miami, specializing in cases involving financial crimes against vulnerable populations. "The evidence against Mrs. Cook is substantial," Chen explained, her fingers tapping efficiently on a thick case file. "The assault charges are straightforward. We have photographic evidence, officer testimony, and even her own admission during the recorded phone call with Brian." "And the financial crimes?" I asked. "That's where things get more complex." Chen adjusted her glasses, a gesture I recognized from my own days on the bench, a moment to gather thoughts before delivering complicated information. "We've linked her to 3 previous cases of fraud and identity theft in Nevada, Arizona, and California. With Mr. Reed's cooperation and the detailed records in her journal, we can establish a pattern of criminal behavior." Brian, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "What about the loans she took out in my name and the money she stole from our accounts?" "We're working with the banks to freeze those assets," Chen assured him. "In cases of proven fraud, you may be relieved of those obligations, though the process can be lengthy." "And her previous victims," I asked, "will they see justice as well?" Chen's expression tightened slightly. The statute of limitations has unfortunately expired on Mr. Reed's case in Nevada, but the Arizona and California victims still have recourse. We're coordinating with prosecutors in those jurisdictions. What kind of sentence are we looking at? Brian's voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the armrest of his chair. Given the multiple charges, the premeditation evidenced in her journal, and the escalation to violent crime, Chen paused, calculating. We're seeking a minimum of 8 to 10 years. With good behavior, she could be out in 5, but that's still significant time. Brian nodded, seemingly satisfied. I, however, had spent too many years in the justice system to take anything for granted. What's her defense strategy? I asked. Chen's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile under different circumstances. She's hired James Peterson. The name hit me like a physical blow. James Peterson was notorious in Miami legal circles, a defense attorney who specialized in getting wealthy clients reduced sentences through whatever means necessary, ethical or otherwise. He'll play dirty, I said, not a question but a certainty. Already has, Chen confirmed. They're building a defense around temporary insanity due to emotional abuse. What? Brian's voice rose in disbelief. She's claiming I abused her? Chen nodded grimly. The narrative they're constructing is that you were controlling, isolated her from friends and family, and that your mother, she nodded toward me, was overbearing and interfered in the marriage, pushing Stephanie to a breaking point. That's absurd, Brian protested. Anyone who knows me knows I'd never— It doesn't matter what's true, I interrupted gently. What matters is what they can make a jury believe. Chen nodded, appreciating my understanding of courtroom tactics. Exactly. Peterson is already gathering character witnesses who will testify to seeing Stephanie in distress, claiming she confided in them about her difficult home situation. Who would possibly— Brian began, then stopped abruptly. Her friends from the country club. The ones she was always texting, always having lunch with. Likely paid or manipulated, I suggested. We don't know that for certain, Chen cautioned. But yes, it's a possibility we're investigating. Peterson is also planning to use your mother's background as a judge against you both. How so? I asked, intrigued despite myself. They'll argue that you, Judge Cook, wielded undue influence over Brian, that you never accepted Stephanie into the family, and that your legal knowledge gave you an unfair advantage in constructing a case against her. I shook my head, marveling at the audacity. Turn the victim into the perpetrator. Classic defense strategy. Will it work? Brian asked, worry creeping into his voice. Chen leaned forward, her expression serious but confident. Not if we do our jobs right. The evidence against Stephanie is overwhelming. The journal alone provides clear proof of premeditation and fraud. Add to that the testimony from Mr. Reed and the other victims, the financial records showing systematic theft, and her final act of breaking in with a firearm. It's a strong case. But, I prompted, hearing the unspoken qualification in her tone. But Peterson is very good at what he does, and juries can be unpredictable. We need to prepare for every possibility. As we left Chen's office an hour later, armed with court dates and preparation schedules, Brian seemed subdued, processing the reality of the legal battle ahead. I never thought I'd be the center of a criminal trial, he said as we walked to the parking garage. Everyone will know what happened, how completely I was fooled. I squeezed his arm reassuringly. What happened to you has happened to many others, Brian. There's no shame in being deceived by someone who made deception their life's work. He nodded, but I could see he wasn't entirely convinced. Rebuilding his self-confidence would take time that would be complicated by the public nature of the upcoming trial. As we reached my car, a voice called out from behind us. Judge Cook! Dr. Cook! We turned to see a man in an expensive suit approaching, his smile wide but not reaching his eyes. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his posture radiating confidence and authority. James Peterson, he introduced himself, extending a hand that neither of us took. I was hoping to catch you both. Mr. Peterson, I acknowledged coolly. I believe any communication should go through our attorney. Naturally, he agreed, undeterred by our frosty reception. But sometimes these matters can be resolved more amicably outside the courtroom. Stephanie is quite willing to discuss a settlement that would avoid the unpleasantness of a public trial. Brian stiffened beside me. A settlement, after everything she's done? Peterson's smile never wavered. Misunderstandings can escalate so quickly in domestic situations. Emotions run high. Things are said and done in the heat of the moment. Misunderstandings? I echoed incredulously. Mr. Peterson, your client systematically defrauded my son, attempted to steal my assets through forged documents, and finally broke into my home with a firearm. Those aren't misunderstandings. Allegations, Peterson corrected smoothly. Allegations that would be examined in a very public, very detailed trial. Dr. Cook's personal and professional life would be scrutinized. Your medical history, Judge Cook, your competence, your relationships, all fair game for exploration. The threat was thinly veiled but clear. They would try to destroy our reputations in court. Are you threatening us, Mr. Peterson? I asked, my voice dropping to the register that had made guilty defendants squirm in my courtroom. To his credit, Peterson didn't flinch. Not at all. I'm merely outlining the realities of a criminal defense. Stephanie has authorized me to offer a plea deal. She admits to simple assault for the wine glass incident, pays restitution for any proven financial losses, and in exchange, the more serious charges are dropped. And she walks away with a slap on the wrist, I concluded. Free to target someone else. That's preposterous, Brian added, finding his voice. We have her journal, Mr. Peterson. We have documented evidence of years of fraud. Peterson's smile tightened slightly. Evidence that could be challenged. Journals can be fabricated. Financial records can be interpreted in many ways. And character witnesses can paint very different pictures of the same person. We'll take our chances with a jury, I said firmly. Now, if you'll excuse us. As we turned to leave, Peterson played his final card. I should mention that Stephanie's father has taken a personal interest in this case. We paused, and I looked back at him. Her father? Richard Montgomery, Peterson said, clearly enjoying the reveal. Perhaps you've heard of him? I had. Richard Montgomery was a real estate developer with significant influence in Miami politics, the kind of wealth and power that could open doors, pressure officials, and make problems disappear. I spent 30 years on the bench, Mr. Peterson, I replied evenly. I've seen powerful men try to interfere with justice before. It didn't sway me then, and it won't sway me now. His smile finally faded. This doesn't have to be adversarial, Judge Cook. Mr. Montgomery simply wants what's best for his daughter. Then perhaps he should have been more present in her formative years, I suggested coolly. Now we really must be going. Any further communication should go through Ms. Chen's office. As we drove away, Brian let out a long breath. So Stephanie comes from money after all. She wasn't just targeting wealth, she was returning to it. It explains a lot, I agreed. The sense of entitlement, the ease with which she moved in affluent circles, and it makes her more dangerous. Richard Montgomery isn't someone to take lightly. What will he do? Brian asked. Whatever he can, I said honestly. But we have truth on our side, Brian, and sometimes that's enough. But as we headed home, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that our battle had just become significantly more complicated. Richard Montgomery's involvement was an unexpected twist, one that could change the entire dynamic of the case. The next morning confirmed my concerns. I woke to find 3 voicemails on my phone, all from friends expressing concern over an article in the Miami Herald's online edition. When I pulled it up on my tablet, the headline made my stomach clench. Judge's son caught in marriage scandal. Wife claims abuse and manipulation. The article, clearly fed by Peterson and the Montgomery PR machine, painted Stephanie as a devoted wife caught in a controlling relationship with a domineering mother-in-law who couldn't let go of her son. It quoted sources close to the family, describing Brian as unstable and possessive, and me as interfering and possibly experiencing cognitive decline. Most disturbing was a statement allegedly from Richard Montgomery himself. My daughter has always been vulnerable to those who would take advantage of her generous nature. The Cook family saw her as an access point to our family's resources. When she refused to facilitate that access, they constructed these outrageous allegations. Brian called before I'd finished reading. "Have you seen it?" His voice was tight with anger. "I'm reading it now," I replied. "Brian, this was inevitable. Peterson warned us they'd attack our reputations." "But it's all lies, every word of it." "Of course it is, and we'll fight it, but we need to be strategic." I paused, thinking. "Call Chen. She needs to know about this immediately. And call your office. Warn them that reporters might start showing up." "Already happened," he said grimly. There was a news van outside the clinic when I arrived. I came in through the back. "Don't speak to them," I advised. "Not a word. Let Chen handle the press." After hanging up, I called Chen myself. She had already seen the article and was preparing a response. "This is actually good for us," she said, surprising me. "They're desperate. Attacking the victims in the press before trial suggests they know their legal case is weak." "Richard Montgomery has resources," I reminded her. "And I have truth and evidence," she countered. "Plus, I've dealt with the Montgomerys before. There's a reason Stephanie changed her name and distanced herself from her family. The Montgomery reputation isn't as pristine as they'd like people to believe." "What do you mean?" Chen hesitated. "I shouldn't share details of previous cases, but let's just say this isn't the first time Richard Montgomery has tried to clean up a mess his daughter created. There were incidents in her youth. Settled quietly, records sealed. This was a revelation, one that might explain Stephanie's practiced manipulation and her father's protectiveness. Not parental love, but damage control for the family name. "Can we access those records?" I asked, my judicial mind already calculating the legal pathways. "I'm working on it," Chen assured me. "In the meantime, expect more attacks. They'll try to rattle you, make you respond emotionally. Don't take the bait." Over the next 2 weeks, the Montgomery-Peterson strategy unfolded exactly as Chen had predicted. More articles appeared, each more outrageous than the last. Anonymous friends of Stephanie gave tearful interviews about her fear of me. Old colleagues were quoted out of context, making me sound harsh and vindictive on the bench. Even Brian's veterinary practices were questioned, with vague allegations of overbilling and unnecessary procedures. Through it all, we maintained our silence in the press while working diligently behind the scenes. Chen filed motions to exclude certain witnesses, challenged the admissibility of character testimony, and most importantly, continued building our case with concrete evidence rather than innuendo. The turning point came 3 weeks before the trial was set to begin. Chen called us to her office, her usually composed face alight with triumph. "We've had a breakthrough," she announced as soon as we were seated. 2 breakthroughs, actually. She slid a folder across her desk. Inside were photographs of a young woman, unmistakably Stephanie, though with a different hairstyle. In handcuffs, being led from what appeared to be a high school. "Sealed juvenile records," Chen explained. "From when Stephanie was 17. She was arrested for running a cheating ring at her private school, selling test answers, writing papers for other students. The charges were ultimately dropped after her father made a substantial donation to the school's building fund." "Her pattern started early," I murmured, studying the photos. "Very early," Chen agreed. "And there's more. We found another victim, one even earlier than Marcus Reed." Brian looked up sharply. "Another man she defrauded?" "Not exactly." Chen's expression was grim but satisfied. "A woman. Emily Winters, her college roommate at Vanderbilt. Stephanie, then still using the Montgomery name, systematically stole from Emily over their freshman year. Cash, jewelry, even her identity to open credit cards. When Emily confronted her, Stephanie planted drugs in their dorm room and called campus security, claiming Emily had been dealing. Let me guess, I said. Emily was expelled and Stephanie walked away clean. Chen nodded. Richard Montgomery made another generous donation, and the matter was handled internally. But Emily kept evidence. Emails, bank statements, even a recording of Stephanie bragging about the setup to a friend. And she's willing to testify? Brian asked, hope creeping into his voice. More than willing. She's been waiting over a decade for this opportunity. Emily went through years of therapy after what Stephanie did to her. She lost her scholarship, her reputation, nearly her future. She's rebuilt her life, but the scars run deep. This was the game changer we needed. Proof that Stephanie's predatory behavior wasn't isolated to romantic relationships, that it predated her marriages, and most importantly, that it formed a pattern dating back to her teens. There's one more thing, Chen said, pulling out another file. We've traced some of the money Stephanie stole from Brian and her previous husbands. Most of it went to offshore accounts, but a significant portion was transferred to a real estate holding company called Monarch Investments. Let me guess, I said. Owned by Richard Montgomery. Partially, Chen replied, but the majority shareholder is Stephanie herself under her birth name. She's been building a real estate portfolio for years, using her stolen funds. Properties in 5 states, all generating rental income that goes directly to accounts only she can access. Brian let out a low whistle. So all this time she was building her own empire? While claiming to be financially dependent on each husband, yes. Chen looked pleased. This proves both motive and premeditation going back years. And it gives us leverage. For what? I asked. A plea deal, Chen said, but on our terms, not theirs. The next day, we met with Peterson in Chen's office. His usual smooth confidence seemed somewhat diminished as Chen methodically laid out the new evidence. The juvenile records, Emily Winter's testimony and evidence, and most damning, the financial trail leading to Monarch Investments. These juvenile records were sealed, Peterson protested weakly. They're inadmissible. The financial records aren't, Chen countered. Neither is Ms. Winter's testimony. And I have a motion before Judge Ramirez to unseal the juvenile records on the grounds that they establish a pattern of behavior relevant to the current charges. Peterson's eyes narrowed. Ramirez is a hanging judge. You know he'll grant it. Chen merely smiled. Here's our offer, Mr. Peterson. Stephanie pleads guilty to all charges. We'll recommend a sentence of 5 years with possibility of parole after 3, provided she undergoes psychological evaluation and treatment. She surrenders all assets in Monarch Investments as restitution to her victims, including Dr. Cook. And she agrees to never contact the Cook family again. 5 years? Peterson scoffed. Mr. Montgomery will never allow— Mr. Montgomery doesn't have a choice, I interrupted, unless he wants his family's dirty laundry aired in open court. Emily Winters isn't the only skeleton in the Montgomery closet, is she, Mr. Peterson? You've been cleaning up after this family for years. It was a shot in the dark, based on Chen's hints and my own intuition, but Peterson's momentary flinch told me I'd hit close to home. I'll need to consult with my client, he said stiffly. You have 48 hours, Chen replied. After that, we proceed to trial with all evidence on the table. After Peterson left, Brian turned to Chen with new respect in his eyes. That was masterful. Will he take the deal? I asked. Chen gathered her files. Oh, he'll fight it initially. Counter with 3 years, no asset surrender. We'll negotiate to 4 years, partial asset surrender. But yes, they'll take something close to our offer. The alternative is too risky for the Montgomery reputation. She was right. 3 days later, we received word that Stephanie was accepting a modified plea deal. 4 years with possibility of parole after 2, surrender of 70% of the Monarch investment assets for restitution, and a restraining order preventing her from contacting any of her victims, including Brian and me. It's a good outcome, Chen assured us when we met to sign the final paperwork. She'll serve real time, her victims will receive compensation, and most importantly, there will be a public record of her crimes that will make it much harder for her to repeat this pattern in the future. Brian nodded, though I could see the complex emotions playing across his face. Relief, sadness, lingering anger, and perhaps a touch of closure. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now," Chen said, "you rebuild your lives while we handle the legal aftermath. The plea hearing is scheduled for next week. Stephanie will formally enter her guilty plea. The judge will review and likely accept our sentencing recommendation, and that will be the end of the criminal proceedings." "And the civil matters?" I inquired, thinking of the loans, the credit cards, the financial tangle Stephanie had created. "Our firm's financial crimes division will continue working with your banks. Most institutions are cooperative once fraud is proven through criminal conviction. It will take time, but we'll sort it out." As we left Chen's office for what would hopefully be one of the last times, Brian seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I didn't think I wanted her to go to prison," he admitted as we walked to the car. Part of me still wanted to believe there was some explanation, some reason that would make sense of everything. But now, I just want it to be over. I want to move forward. I squeezed his arm. "And you will, Brian. This is just the beginning of your new chapter." The Miami-Dade County Courthouse hadn't changed much in the 3 years since my retirement. The same marble floors, the same echoey hallways, the same mix of tension and tedium that permeated the air. But today I walked these familiar corridors not as Judge Cook, but as a victim seeking justice. Brian and I sat in the gallery behind the prosecution table, where Rebecca Chen was arranging her files with meticulous precision. The courtroom was more crowded than usual for a plea hearing. Word had gotten out about the Montgomery connection, and several reporters sat with notepads ready. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m., Judge Michael Ramirez entered, and we all rose. At 60, Ramirez was a contemporary of mine, though we'd never been close. He had a reputation for fairness and by-the-book procedure, which was exactly what we needed today. Case number 2025 CR 7429, State of Florida versus Stephanie Cook, the bailiff announced. Plea hearing. The side door opened and Stephanie entered, escorted by a female corrections officer. She wore a navy blue pantsuit rather than prison garb, a concession likely arranged by Peterson to maintain her dignity before the court. But nothing could disguise the strain of the past weeks in detention. Her hair had lost its perfect styling, her face was drawn, and without her usual makeup, she looked older, harder. For a moment, her eyes met Brian's across the courtroom. I felt him tense beside me, but he held her gaze steadily, neither accusatory nor intimidated. It was Stephanie who looked away first. Judge Ramirez reviewed the plea agreement methodically, asking Stephanie at each point if she understood the terms. Her "Yes, Your Honor" responses were quiet but clear. "Mrs. Cook," Ramirez said finally, "before I accept this plea, I need to confirm that you are entering it voluntarily, with full understanding of the consequences. Has anyone pressured or coerced you into accepting these terms?" Stephanie glanced briefly at Peterson, then at someone in the gallery. Her father, I presumed, though I resisted the urge to turn and look. "No, Your Honor," she replied. "I am accepting this plea voluntarily. And do you understand that by pleading guilty, you are admitting to committing the crimes of assault, fraud, identity theft, and attempted extortion?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well." Ramirez adjusted his glasses. "The court accepts your plea of guilty. In accordance with the agreement reached between the state and the defense, I hereby sentence you to 4 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after serving 2 years. Additionally, you are ordered to surrender 70% of assets held under Monarch Investments for restitution to your victims, as detailed in Appendix B of the plea agreement." The gavel came down, finalizing the sentence. As Stephanie was led away, she turned once more toward Brian, her expression unreadable. "Brian," she called softly, ignoring the officer's warning. "I'm sorry. For everything." Brian did not respond. He simply watched as she was escorted out, his face a study in contained emotion. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, perhaps not ever. But it was acknowledgement, a silent recognition that this chapter was closing. In the hallway afterward, we were approached by a distinguished-looking man in his 70s, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting wealth and authority. Richard Montgomery's resemblance to his daughter was subtle but undeniable. The same sharp eyes, the same set of the jaw. "Judge Cook," he said, his voice cultured and controlled. "Dr. Cook, I wanted to speak with you both." I felt Brian stiffen beside me, but we both maintained our composure. "Mr. Montgomery," I acknowledged with a slight nod. "I want you to know," he began, "that I never condoned Stephanie's actions. What she did to your family, to the others before you, was inexcusable. Yet you tried to help her escape the consequences," I observed. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "I'm her father. Despite everything, despite the disappointments and the incidents over the years, she's my child. I had to try." "Did you know?" Brian asked suddenly. "About her other marriages? Her schemes?" Montgomery hesitated, and in that hesitation I read the truth. "Not at first," he admitted finally. "The early incidents, the cheating ring, the trouble with her college roommate, those I wrote off as youthful indiscretions, the kind many privileged children go through. I thought if I protected her from the worst consequences, gave her another chance, she would learn." "But she didn't," I said. "No." Montgomery's expression hardened. "Instead, she became more sophisticated, more calculating. By the time I realized the extent of her activities, she had already been through 2 marriages. I tried to intervene then, offered her a position in my company, therapy, a fresh start. She refused, cut ties, changed her name." "Until she needed your help again," Brian noted. Montgomery nodded. "When she called from jail, it was the first contact we'd had in nearly 3 years. She claimed innocence, of course. Said you," he looked at me, "had fabricated evidence out of jealousy and control." "And you believed her?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I wanted to," he said simply. What father wouldn't want to believe in his child's innocence? But then Peterson found the journal, the Monarch Investments records. The evidence was irrefutable. He straightened his shoulders, composing himself. "I'm not here to make excuses for her, or for my own failures as a parent. I'm here to offer my personal apology and to assure you that the restitution will be handled promptly. Monarch Investments will be liquidated within 30 days, and all victims will receive their due compensation." "Thank you," Brian said after a moment, his voice neutral but not hostile. "That's appreciated." Montgomery nodded once, then turned to leave. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. "She wasn't always like this, you know. There was a time when she was just a bright, ambitious little girl with her whole future ahead of her." His voice faltered slightly. "Somewhere along the way, I lost that child. I hope the time in prison gives her a chance to find herself again." With that, he walked away, the weight of his regrets almost visible in the slope of his shoulders. "Do you think she can change?" Brian asked softly as we watched Montgomery disappear down the corridor. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Some people can, given the right circumstances, the right motivation. But it would take profound self-awareness, genuine remorse, years of therapy." "I hope she finds it," Brian said, surprising me. "Not for my sake. I don't think I can ever forgive what she did to us. But for herself. Living with that much calculation, that much deception. It must be exhausting." I squeezed his arm, my heart swelling with pride at his compassion even after everything he'd endured. "Come on," I said. "Let's go home." 3 months after Stephanie's sentencing, I stood in the doorway of what had once been Brian's childhood bedroom, watching as he applied a second coat of paint to the walls. The soft blue, "sky after a storm," he called it, brightened the room, transforming the space that had briefly been a refuge into something new. "It's looking good," I commented, handing him a glass of iced tea. He stepped back to assess his work. "Thanks. I think it'll be perfect as a home office. The morning light is ideal." Brian had found a small apartment closer to his veterinary practice, a fresh start away from the memories that lingered in my house. But he still came over several times a week for dinner, to help with household projects, or simply to talk. Our relationship, tested by Stephanie's manipulation, had emerged stronger, more honest. The legal aftermath of Stephanie's crimes had been largely resolved. The banks had cleared most of the fraudulent loans once the criminal conviction was finalized. The restitution from Monarch Investments had compensated Brian for his financial losses, though as he often said, the emotional cost could never be fully repaid. Most surprisingly, Marcus Reed had reached out to Brian professionally. The two veterinarians, bonded by their shared experience as Stephanie's victims, were now discussing a potential partnership. Reed was considering relocating to Miami to join Brian's practice, bringing his specialty in exotic animal care to complement Brian's expertise in surgical procedures. "Have you thought more about Reed's offer?" I asked as Brian cleaned his paintbrush. "I have," he replied. "Actually, we're meeting tomorrow to discuss details. If it works out, we could expand the practice significantly. He has connections with the wildlife rehabilitation centers in the Everglades that could open up a whole new client base." "That sounds promising," I said, genuinely pleased to see him excited about his professional future again. The early days after Stephanie's arrest had been dark ones for Brian, his confidence shattered, his trust in his own judgment severely compromised. But gradually, with the help of Dr. Alicia Johnson, a therapist specializing in recovery from manipulative relationships, he had begun to rebuild. "Oh, and I got a call today," he added, his tone casual but his eyes brightening. "From the state conference on domestic violence. They want me to speak at their annual meeting next month." I raised an eyebrow, surprised but impressed. "That's quite an opportunity. What would you speak about?" "Financial abuse in relationships, particularly targeting men." He set down the paintbrush, his expression turning thoughtful. "It's something that doesn't get talked about much. There's this perception that men can't be victims of manipulation or control, especially financial control. But statistics show it happens more often than people realize. And many victims, like Marcus, never come forward because of shame," I added, understanding his passion for the topic. Brian nodded. "Exactly. I thought, well, maybe by sharing my experience, I could help others recognize the warning signs or feel less alone if they've already been through it." Pride swelled in my chest. This was the Brian I had always known was there. Compassionate, thoughtful, turning his own pain into purpose. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Would you help me prepare?" he asked. "Your experience from the legal side would add valuable perspective." "Of course," I assured him. "Whatever you need." Over the next few weeks, Brian threw himself into research for his presentation while simultaneously finalizing his partnership with Marcus Reed. I watched with quiet satisfaction as he regained his confidence, his sense of purpose. The haunted look that had shadowed his eyes in the early days after Stephanie's arrest gradually faded, replaced by determination and increasingly moments of genuine joy. The day of the conference arrived, crisp and clear. I sat in the audience, dressed in my best suit, watching as Brian took the podium. At 35, with his hair tied back in a professional bun and wearing a blue suit that matched his eyes, he looked every inch the respected professional he was. "My name is Brian Cook," he began, his voice strong and steady. "And today I'm going to share with you how a broken glass of wine saved my life." For 40 minutes, he held the audience spellbound, alternating between moments of raw vulnerability when describing his own abuse and precise analysis of how the system often fails to recognize and address financial abuse, particularly when men are the victims. He concluded with a call for more education, better laws, and greater awareness. Financial abuse leaves no visible bruises, he said in closing. Its wounds are on bank statements, credit reports, and in the shattered self-worth of its victims. But with proper recognition, support, and resources, healing is possible. I stand before you today as proof of that. Thank you. The standing ovation he received lasted several minutes. As I watched, tears in my eyes, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. My son had transformed his pain into purpose, his experience into wisdom that would help others. After the talk, as we prepared to leave, Brian was approached by an older woman, elegantly dressed, with a badge identifying her as a representative of a philanthropic foundation. "Mr. Cook, your presentation was extraordinary," the woman said. "I'm Victoria Sinclair from the Hamilton Foundation. I'm impressed with the work you're doing. We'd like to discuss the possibility of funding to expand your outreach efforts." Brian looked at me, his eyes wide with surprise and hope. I nodded encouragingly. "That would be wonderful, Ms. Sinclair," he replied with genuine enthusiasm. "I've been developing educational materials for healthcare providers to help identify signs of financial abuse, but with proper funding, we could reach so many more people." They exchanged cards, agreeing to a meeting the following week. As we walked toward the parking lot, Brian seemed to be floating with excitement. "Can you believe it?" he exclaimed. "Real funding for the project. We could create materials in different languages, develop an app for secure financial tracking, maybe even establish a support network for victims." "You deserve it, Brian," I replied truthfully. "You've worked hard, and you're making a difference in people's lives." He stopped suddenly in the middle of the parking lot and hugged me. A strong hug full of gratitude and love. "None of this would have been possible without you, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Without your strength that night, without your persistence afterward, without your support throughout this entire process." I returned the hug, feeling the peculiar sensation that only mothers know, pride and nostalgia simultaneously, seeing your child grow beyond what you could ever have imagined. "You always had that strength inside you, Brian," I told him softly. "You just needed to rediscover it." That evening, as I drove home alone, Brian had gone directly to his new apartment to prepare for his meeting with the foundation. I reflected on the events of the past 6 months. The assault with the glass, the police report, the discovery of the financial crimes, Stephanie's arrest, the trial, and now this promising new chapter in Brian's life. It was impossible not to think about how a moment of violence, terrible as it was, had triggered a series of events that brought not only justice, but also healing and purpose. The broken glass had shattered more than crystal that night. It had broken Stephanie's power over Brian, the lies that had built their relationship, and the illusion that abuse only happens to certain types of people. In its place, we had built something new and stronger, a renewed bond between mother and son, a shared purpose, the transformation of a traumatic experience into hope for others. I parked in my garage, entered the house, and turned on the lights. The silence greeted me, no longer the oppressive silence of loneliness or the tense silence that had preceded the assault that night, but a peaceful silence of a life that had weathered the storm and found serenity on the other side. I made a cup of tea and sat on the deck, watching the starry Miami sky. I remembered Dr. Johnson's words during one of the joint therapy sessions Brian had invited me to attend. "Sometimes we need to break completely to rebuild ourselves stronger, like that crystal glass our family had shattered momentarily. But what we'd built from those fragments was more resilient, more authentic, and infinitely more precious than what we had before. If you liked this story, click to subscribe and tell me in the comments what part left you speechless. And if you've ever had to rebuild from a broken moment, share your experience below. Your story matters too.